Professor Eyal Zisser, Tel Aviv University, thanks so much for joining me today. So we've seen an official visit by Prime Minister Bennett to Bahrain this week. What is the significance of this unique, first-of-a-kind visit?
Well, it's a very significant visit. I mean, unlike Egypt or Jordan, with which we have a peaceful relation for so many years, and still, when it comes to an official visit of a prime minister, it's very rare. And usually, sometime we see a picture of such a meeting between the Prime Minister and President Sisi. In the case of King Abdullah, we haven't seen even a picture. Here, they don't care. They and the public do not care about the Palestinian issue. They don't have any, what I would call, domestic obstacle to normalize relation and to reach such a significant level of intimacy and warmness.
But we are seeing criticism. Bahrain is a state of majority, 90% of Shiite ruled by 10% of Sunni, influenced by Iran, and Iran is very unlikely and favorite of this move.
Yes, you are absolutely right. There is a difference between the Emirates, where there is no any such problem, and Bahrain, which should be more careful to a certain degree. But I guess with the backing of the Saudis, with the backing, the public backing of the Emirates, the king there feel quite secure. And let me remind you that when the Arab Spring erupted, Bahrain was one of the first countries to be hit by this wave, by this tsunami of protest. But then the Saudis, the Emirates, other Gulf countries sent forces and suppress what seemed to be a Shiite unrest or protest. And since then, we have to take it into consideration, and still, you know, probably most of the population see themselves as Arab rather than as Shiite, and this gives, I guess, the needed support for the king in such moves.
Let's, Professor Zisser, try to drill down what's in it for both sides. What's in it for Israel, what's in it for Bahrain?
Well, as far as Israel is concerned, I mean, Bahrain for itself, it's not so important, but it's not only Bahrain, it's the Emirates, it's Sudan, it's Morocco, so one by one, it's adding and the combination and the sum is what matters. And still, Bahrain, you know, we always complain that the Iranians are trying to establish themselves in Syria, in Lebanon, in Gaza. Think of Iran, you know. We have now presence in Bahrain, already a presence of an Israeli officer, you know. Naval officer, it's official. So they have Israeli military or Israeli presence 20, 30, 40 miles from their shore. So for Iran, it's very significant, and this is why also for Israel it's significant, and this is to say the security dimension is very important, although other dimensions are important as well, high-tech, and of course the economic dimension is important. They are not poor countries, unlike Egypt or Jordan, so they have something to offer to Israel.
It is no secret that usually Arab states get closer in the last few years to Israel because of the weakening of the United States. It is obvious with the UAE, with Bahrain, which are looking around the Middle East. They saw what happened in Afghanistan, they see what's happening in Iraq, they see the negotiations to go back to the JCPOA with Iran, and they say to themselves, we are deserted, we're left alone, and then they turn to Israel.
Yes, well, I guess that eventually the Americans wouldn't leave the area. I mean, it's fascinating to find out that Russia, you know, how many planes Russia have in Syria, how many troops Russia have in Syria. The Americans have 10 times troops and aircrafts in this region than Russia, and still the image is of victorious Putin and defeated Biden. And Trump is promised us to leave Syria already in 2018, and the Americans are still there and probably to stay in Syria. So the Americans are not to leave, and still the Americans are limited when it comes to, how to retaliate when the Iranians or the Houthis in Yemen are launching rockets against the Emirates, against the Saudis, against Bahrain, and here Israel can help. I guess Israel is not to replace the United States, but to upgrade the military systems of these countries, something Israel clearly can do.
And do you see a further or stronger cooperation? I heard the words Mediterranean NATO of a kind. I can't see Emiratis or Bahrainis coming to fight alongside the IDF soldiers vis-a-vis Gaza or Lebanon, but do you see Israel assisting them in their wars? Do you see Israel, you've mentioned the UAE being fired from Yemen. Do you see Israel assisting them, for example, by Iron Dome or such Israeli systems?
Well, if you remember, in '81, it was before Israel launched the first Lebanon war. Sharon spoke. Then defense minister spoke of an alliance between Israel and the Americans. If the Iraqis or the Iranians would attack Kuwait, we will interfere. It's not the case anymore. Clearly, the Israeli public will not let any Israeli government to send troops. So to fight on their behalf, no way. But Iron Dome or even joint operation. I mean, today most of the Israeli military operations are secret, hidden from the public eye. We even don't say that we did it. So, in this regard, there is a place for, more intimate joint cooperation.
The cooperation with Israel turned them to be more vulnerable. I mean, you've mentioned Bahrain being 20 minutes away from Iran. Dubai is 40 minutes away from Dubai. And now there is an Israeli naval officer in the Fifth Fleet stationed in Bahrain. Does it risk more than before those countries for an Iranian retaliation, direct or indirect?
Well, I don't think so. When the Emirates announced that, they would sign a peace agreement with Israel, first of all, the Turkish reaction was to call the Turkish ambassador back to Ankara. Now, there is an official visit of Erdogan in the Emirates. They become intimate, The Emirates became important to Turkey.
And an official visit of an Israeli president in Ankara next month.
Okay. And then, the Crown Prince, or a close advisor to the Crown Prince who visited Israel, visited also Tehran, So they turn to be a card in this game, and an important card that everybody wants to maintain close relations. So I don't think they feel unsecure. On the contrary, it made them stronger than they were before.
A year ago, everybody expected Saudi Arabia to be next and to join those relationships. This didn't happen. Why?
In the case of Saudi Arabia, it's much more complicated. We are speaking about a big country, 35, almost 40 million people, with different trends and public opinion rooted in animosity against the religious background towards Israel. It's much more complicated, and maybe it happens only when there is a transition, when the Crown Prince becomes a...
So if it's down to MBS, he will do it?
That's what I think, but God knows, we often say in the Middle East.
So I look at those countries, and then I look at those that you've mentioned, Egypt, in which we have peace for 43 years, Jordan, which we have peace for 28 years. we are seeing those relationships kept in the closet. We don't see their leaders visiting over. We don't see tourism. We see very few industry or industrial economical exchange. They are on our side more than ever in the past because they analyze the area. They don't like Iran. They don't like ISIS. They are afraid of Al Qaeda. Same enemies, but still they don't do the move.
Well, because first of all, unlike Bahrain or the Emirates, Israel can offer very little to them, and they can offer very little to us, apart from tourism. And there is the public opinion, and there is the Palestinian issue. I think what is important in this, you call them peaceful relations. Yes, even between Ukraine and Russia, there is peace, right? Nowadays, before the invasion. So normal relations, peaceful relations. I think what is important here is that nobody in Jordan or Egypt speaks about war, about cutting relations. They hate Israel, and still they don't think of, that's the major achievement, but this is, and also the problem is that they are too close to us. Too close to us in the sense that because they are too close to us, there is the competition. Israel doesn't compete with the Emirates about regional hegemony. Israel doesn't compete with the Emirates about involvement, interference, influence in Africa. You know, there is no historical background at some time create an obstacle. So because they are far away, it's much more easier to advance very rapidly in our relations with the Gulf state, and this is not the case with Egypt and Jordan.
Let's share a word about Turkey. The shift in Erdogan's ideas, saying it is no secret, Erdogan, Islamic Brotherhood, he dislikes Israel. It is obvious during the last 10 plus years. What has changed? Because now we see him the most romanticist person in the area, flirting with Israel, inviting Israel, is sending Turks over. What's going on?
Well, we always witness ups and downs with Turkey, and this will be the case here as well. I guess the next round of violence in Gaza will lead to, our statement from Erdogan. I'm sure about that. But, and even when he was hostile, and even when official relations were frozen, the economy relations were booming, tourism. But what has changed, is I think when he looked about what he achieved and what he failed to achieve, I guess he understands that, his dream about, Muslim Islamic regimes in Syria, Egypt, Qatar, Gaza, the Palestinian Authority, well, this didn't happen. Iran is still an historical enemy. For almost 500 years, the enemy of the Ottomans were the Iranians. So it's still the enemy. Iraq, when the Americans leave Iraq, what will happen there? So, he is a realistic man, and that's why I understand that he needs to...
he needs alliances.
Yes, that's right.
And he's better off with the devil he knows.
Yeah.
Professor Eyal Zisser, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.